The crystal wings of the dragon. It was said that every 100 years, the air over the Elrindor Forest would shimmer, touched by something older than memory. The leaves would quiver, and the rivers would hush, listening. The light would shift, an ancient magic stirring awake in the quiet woods. And like clockwork, the forest folk would speak in reverent whispers of the coming flight of Eldrion, the crystal-winged dragon, whose wings shone with 1,000 fragments of light, holding secrets only he could reveal. To see Eldrion was to glimpse the past woven with the present, a gift reserved for only the bravest souls. One such soul was Lira, a young elf who had heard tales of Eldrion her whole life, her curiosity only growing with each story. She had wandered the winding paths of Elrindor with her bow in hand since she could remember. Yet nothing excited her quite like the mystery of the crystal-winged dragon. She'd listened as the village elders shared fragments of lore, each retelling of Eldrion's flight adorned with new layers of mystery, and each year her desire to see the dragon herself grew stronger. Now, with the day drawing near, the urge within her was undeniable. Lira packed her belongings, some bread, a flask of clear water, and her bow, which felt like an extension of herself. She glanced back at her small cottage, where the vines clung to the stone walls, and wondered if she'd return different, carrying the dragon's light within her. But the journey, she knew, was not for one. To reach the best vantage point, she would need an ally, someone who could help her cross the many treacherous obstacles that lay ahead. Her thoughts turned to the dwarves, the stout and strong folk who lived among the craggy cliffs of the western mountains. They were known for their courage, though few ventured far from their caves. With the calling fresh in her heart, she made her way to the nearest dwarven settlement, hoping to find someone willing to journey with her into the unknown. There she met Borin. He was not like the dwarves she had met in passing, where they were blunt and quick to brush off matters of legend. Borin listened quietly, his eyes sharp and watchful. He was a dwarf who bore scars of past battles, yet a glint of adventure still sparked in his gaze. When she told him of Eldrion's flight, he listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "Are you saying you wish to see the dragon yourself?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "Yes," Lira replied, meeting his gaze with a boldness she hoped he would respect. "I want to see what only a few have witnessed. They say his wings carry a magic as old as the stars." Borin's gaze grew distant, as if recalling something lost to time. He looked at her thoughtfully, and after a silence thick with unspoken words, he nodded. "I have heard of Eldrion," he said quietly, "and not without reason. My kin once saw his wings long ago, and there's talk that the knowledge of his flight could lift the burden of the past." "What burden?" she asked, sensing a story hidden within his words. But Borin only shook his head, a secretive smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. If we are to reach the place in time, we must leave by dawn. The forest has many paths, but only one that Eldrion flies over. His tone softened, as though he understood her more than he let on. And to tread it is to test one's courage. So it was decided. Lira and Borin would set out together, an unlikely pair bound by a shared purpose neither fully understood. As the first light touched the trees, they met at the edge of the forest, dwarven hammer and elven bow side by side, ready for the mysteries that awaited them. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that clings to the silence before dawn. Together, they would face the trials of Elrindor, both knowing that no matter how skilled or brave they were, the journey would test them in ways they could not yet fathom. In the dim glow of morning, with mist clinging to the ground like ghosts of old legends, they took their first steps forward, disappearing into the shadows of the waiting forest. The forest loomed vast and silent as Lira and Borin ventured deeper into its heart, a place where even the light dared not linger long. The air grew dense, heavy with the scent of damp earth and whispers of ancient secrets. Each step felt as though they were treading on the edges of old magic, brushing past things that watched from within the shadows. As they walked, they could feel the weight of the forest around them, a presence both watchful and indifferent, as if Elrindor itself was testing their resolve. Lira moved with the grace of an elf, her feet silent on the forest floor. Borin's sturdy figure, shorter but unyielding, seemed out of place amidst the delicate vines and curling roots. Yet his step was steady, his focus unbroken. He carried a small hammer at his side, a dwarven heirloom engraved with runes that glinted faintly, as if answering the call of the forest's mystery. The two walked in quiet harmony, each respecting the other's silence as they pushed forward along the forbidden path. Their first challenge appeared as they reached a wide, churning river. It wound its way through the forest like a silver serpent, its current swift and unforgiving. The only bridge, a narrow row of moss-covered stones, lay half submerged beneath the rushing water. Crossing would be perilous. Lira narrowed her eyes, studying the stones. "I could make it," she murmured, thinking of her nimble elven feet, yet glancing at Borin with worry. "Let me try something first," Borin replied, his voice a steady rumble. He knelt by the river, touching the stone with his palm, as if listening. He muttered a few words in the ancient dwarven tongue, and a faint glow pulsed along the rocks. With each word, the stone seemed to rise just enough to break the water's surface, creating a pathway stable enough for both of them. Lira smiled in admiration. "You never told me you could speak to stone." Borin only shrugged, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. There are many things I know, Elf. Let's keep moving. Together, they crossed the river, the roar of the current fading as they continued down the shadowed path. But Elrindor was not finished with them. The forest grew darker, the trees thicker, their twisted branches reaching down like fingers seeking to ensnare. The silence was complete now, deep enough that even their breaths seemed an intrusion. And then they came to an ancient stone circle, hidden from the world's eyes by layers of ivy and moss. The stones, massive and rough-hewn, stood like guardians, and in their midst was an inscription. Borin brushed his fingers over the words, his brow furrowing as he translated. Only those who seek with courage may pass. Speak the truth or turn back. What truth? Lira whispered, feeling a chill. Only one way to find out. Borin faced her, his gaze unyielding. The forest is testing us, Elf. It will demand something of us. As they each stepped forward, the ground beneath them seemed to shift, and a voice, a deep, echoing rumble, filled the air coming from the stones themselves. What is it that you seek? The voice demanded, its tone woven with the power of ancient things. Lyra's heart beat faster, but she stepped forward, her voice steady. I seek the flight of Eldrion, the crystal-winged dragon, for I wish to understand the magic of his wings and the stories they carry. The voice seemed to consider her words before turning to Borin, who stood with his jaw clenched. The dwarf spoke, his voice lower, a hint of sadness seeping through. I seek Eldrion's flight to fulfill a promise. My kin witnessed his wings, and our family was blessed with knowledge. But we lost it over time. I want to bring it back. There was a silence, thick and final, as if the forest weighed their answers in its eternal balance. Then, slowly the stones seemed to soften, their shapes blurring as the path ahead opened, revealing a trail winding deeper into the heart of Elrindor. You are allowed to pass, the voice intoned, fading back into silence. They continued, neither speaking for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. But now, a silent bond linked them, a shared understanding. They were both seeking something they could not fully grasp, something beyond their own lives. As they moved deeper into the forest, Lira glanced at Borin, a newfound respect in her gaze. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For your truth. Borin nodded, his gaze steady. Thank you for yours, Elf. We are closer now, I think. They journeyed onward, aware that the forest trials were not yet over. The path ahead twisted into shadows, where secrets waited, and the true test of courage would be unveiled. The heart of Elrindor had accepted them, but it had only just begun its tests. The path wound deeper into Elrindor, the forest thickening around Lira and Borin, until it seemed as though the trees themselves had grown denser to shield what lay beyond. Sunlight scarcely touched the ground now, its golden warmth swallowed by an endless twilight beneath the canopy. Shadows stretched long and thick, moving in strange ways, as though the forest were alive with restless spirits. Lira felt it first, a chill in the air that seeped beneath her skin, drawing her mind to a strange unease she could not shake. As they moved forward, she noticed carvings appearing on the trees, symbols that pulse faintly with a dim, eerie light. Runes, perhaps Elven, but older than any she'd ever seen. They seemed to whisper as they passed, though she could not understand the words. Borin paused beside one of the trees, his fingers tracing a symbol that resembled an eye with a broken pupil. He pulled his hand back as though burned, his face creased in suspicion. "I don't like this, elf," he muttered, glancing warily at the darkening forest. "There are things here that aren't meant to be seen." Lira nodded, feeling the shadows pressing closer. "It's as if the forest is warning us to turn back. Perhaps we're trespassing where we shouldn't be." Borin's gaze hardened. "We've come too far to let a few shadows frighten us. We're close. I can feel it." But beneath his determined expression, a flicker of doubt lingered. They continued, though the silence grew heavy, settling over them like a shroud. Every few steps, Lira glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see something watching from the shadows. The strange symbols glowed brighter now, casting an unsettling light on the path ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led somewhere, though she didn't know if it was to the dragon's path or into something far darker. As they moved forward, the forest seemed to shift around them, the path becoming unfamiliar despite having followed it for hours. Lira felt her pulse quicken, a creeping fear that something was bending the forest's reality. "Borin," she whispered, "are you sure we're still on the right path?" Borin looked back at her, the furrow in his brow deepening. "The forest plays tricks. Elrindor does this to travelers, leading them in circles. But I know we're close. I can feel it in my bones." She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. The forest felt different here, as if they had stepped into a part of Elrindor that rejected them. Maybe we're meant to turn back. Perhaps this is a sign that Eldrion's flight is not for us to see. Borin clenched his jaw, his expression growing stubborn. "I came to find the dragon's flight, and I won't leave without it. We've already faced the river and the stone circle. There's no sense in letting shadows send us home." Yet as they spoke, the air seemed to hum, a low vibration filling the silence. Out of the corner of her eye, Lira saw movement. A flicker of a shadow darting between the trees, quick and silent. She turned sharply, her hand instinctively gripping her bow, but there was nothing there. Only more shadows, playing tricks on her eyes. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. Borin nodded, his own hand resting on his hammer. "You're not imagining things. Something is here, and it's watching us." Lyra's heart raced, and she fought the urge to turn and run. She looked at Borin, seeing the same tension in his shoulders, the same glint of fear hidden behind his steady gaze. Do you think the forest means to trap us here?" Borin's eyes flickered, the briefest flash of doubt breaking through his resolve. "Maybe. But if it does, then we'll find a way out. We didn't come this far to be frightened by shadows." The silence thickened, stretching between them like a thread pulled taut. It felt as though the forest itself waited, listening to their every word. Lyra sensed it too, the weight of their choices pressing down on them, forcing them to confront their own fears. After a long pause, she straightened, meeting Borin's gaze with renewed determination. "We came for the crystal wings," she said, her voice firm, though her heart still pounded. "If Eldrion's flight holds secrets for us, we'll find them, shadows or not." Borin nodded, his grip on his hammer tightening. "Together then, no matter what lies ahead." They moved forward, side by side, their steps slower, but their resolve strengthened by the silent vow between them. The shadows still danced and whispered, yet now they felt less like warnings and more like tests. The forest was watching, waiting to see if their courage would endure. As they stepped deeper into the twilight, the symbols began to fade, the light around them dimming until it was only the faintest glow guiding their way. The doubts lingered, shadows in their minds, but Lira and Borin pressed on, refusing to surrender to the forest's haunting games. Ahead, a faint light flickered, like the shimmer of stars caught in a web of branches. They exchanged a glance, each knowing that they had passed through the forest's trial of doubt. Whatever lay ahead now, they would face it with courage and unity, together against whatever secrets the heart of Elrindor might still hold. The forest opened up to a wide clearing, a hidden sanctuary beneath the towering trees that seemed to part deliberately for the stars to gaze upon the earth. Lira and Borin halted at the edge of this space, sensing they had arrived at a place both hallowed and secret. The air felt different here, charged with an energy that neither had felt before. A soft vibration that resonated in their bones, awakening a quiet awe. Night had fully fallen, draping the forest in darkness save for a faint silvery glow illuminating the clearing. Lira glanced upward, her breath catching as she saw that the sky above was littered with stars, each one more brilliant than she'd ever seen. It was as though the heavens had drawn closer, pulled down to witness what was about to unfold. Borin stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his face softened by the starlight. "We're here," he murmured, almost to himself, his voice reverent. "Eldrion will come." And then, as if summoned by his words, a soft tremor rippled through the air, carrying with it a sound both low and resonant, like the first note of a song too ancient for mortal ears. Lira felt it in her chest, a deep hum that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest. She and Borin stood still, spellbound, as a shimmer of light appeared in the sky. A single glimmer, bright and sharp, cutting through the night. The light grew, expanding into a radiant glow that traced an arc across the stars. And then, in one breathtaking moment, Eldrion appeared. The dragon soared from the shadows, his immense wings stretched wide, their translucent crystalline edges catching the starlight and scattering it across the clearing in a dance of colors. Every beat of Eldrion's wings sent waves of light cascading over the forest, casting prisms of shimmering blues, greens and purples that painted the world in shades of wonder. His scales were silver, yet glinted with the hues of 1,000 gemstones, each shift in his form revealing another layer of brilliance. Lira felt her heart swell, her mind blank with awe as she gazed up at Eldrion. She had heard tales of the crystal-winged dragon, but none had prepared her for this. This creature of light and shadow, woven from magic itself, floating above them as though gravity were an afterthought. Beside her, Borin seemed equally spellbound. The fierce lines of his face softened, his eyes reflecting the dragon's glow, his grip on his hammer forgotten. There was something in his gaze that went beyond wonder, a look that spoke of reverence, of recognition. Lira understood in that moment that Borin was not just here to witness Eldrion's flight. He was here to reclaim a piece of his history, his kin's lost knowledge of this ancient magic. The dragon circled overhead, his wings casting shifting mosaics of light across the ground, as if the very earth were responding to his presence. And then, Eldrion's wings began to slow, folding like the petals of an otherworldly flower until he hovered just above the clearing. His immense crystalline gaze fixed on them both. A deep voice filled the air, resonating with the same ancient timbre as the forest. "You have come to witness," Eldrion spoke, each word woven with a power that reached into the soul. "To witness and to remember." Lira felt a shiver run down her spine, her voice caught in her throat. She could only nod, her eyes wide, her heart pounding with both fear and awe. Borin stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "We came seeking the knowledge of your wings, the magic that has lived since the first stars." Eldrion regarded them, his gaze piercing yet calm. "Knowledge is not given, it is earned, as light is revealed only through shadow. You have walked the forbidden path, faced the doubts that linger within, and yet you stand here still. For this, I shall grant you my light." With a slow, graceful motion, Eldrion lifted one of his crystal wings, allowing the starlight to refract through it in a blinding, beautiful cascade. The light bathed Lira and Borin, illuminating their faces with a warmth that seeped deep, beyond skin, beyond bone. The light seemed to carry images, fragments of stories, echoes of past lives, of ancient bonds, of times when elves, dwarves, and dragons walked in unity. Lira gasped as visions filled her mind. Ancient forests, vast mountains, and realms long forgotten. She saw dragons and elves working together, dwarves forging tools with wisdom granted by the dragon's light. She saw herself and Borin standing as they were now, but as part of something greater. A legacy, a promise that stretched back to a time when the world was young. Beside her, Borin's face was wet with tears, though he seemed unaware. His shoulders shook as he too glimpsed the history of his kin, the bond they had once shared with these creatures of light. In that moment, the weight he carried, the lost legacy of his ancestors, seemed to lift, replaced by something deeper, a peace born of understanding. The light faded. An Eldrion rose, his wings lifting him higher as he prepared to continue his journey across the stars. "Remember what you have seen," he intoned, his voice a fading echo. "For my flight is but a heartbeat in the forest's life, but its light is forever." And with the final graceful sweep of his wings, Eldrion vanished, his form dissolving into a trail of stardust that lingered briefly before fading into the night. The clearing grew still, bathed once more in the gentle light of the stars above. Lira and Borin stood in silence, the vision lingering within them like the afterglow of a dream. They understood now that Eldrion's wings were more than a sight to behold. They were a reminder, a bridge to a forgotten past. A reminder that magic was not something to be taken, but something to be cherished and protected. With a shared glance, they knew their journey was complete. But the light of Eldrion's gift would remain with them, a beacon to guide them through the world they would soon return to, forever changed. The forest felt different as Lira and Borin began their journey homeward, the shadows lighter, the trees whispering in tones they could almost understand. The air carried a sense of calm, as if the ancient woods themselves had blessed their journey. Yet within them, the vision of Eldrion's wings lingered, a light unfading, filling them with a reverence that neither could put into words. They walked in silence, side by side, each absorbing what they had seen. Lyra's mind brimmed with fragments of the past, scenes of elven archers and dwarven craftsmen, of dragons soaring through skies unspoiled by time, of a world bound together by a unity now faded. Every image left an imprint, a connection that felt both distant and deeply personal, as though she herself were part of that lost era. She knew that Eldrion's gift was more than a memory. It was a call to safeguard what remained. Beside her, Borin walked with a softened step, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if he was carrying a great weight. But it was no longer the burden of his ancestors' forgotten legacy. it was something brighter. A realization that his kin's stories had not vanished into shadow. He had reclaimed them, brought them back to life through the dragon's light. The ancient bond between dwarves, elves, and dragons was real. And he felt it in his bones, in the very earth beneath his feet. Lira, Borin spoke quietly, breaking the silence at last. His voice was different, filled with an emotion that surprised even him. Eldrion, he gave us more than I expected. The memories, the light, it's as though we carry part of his magic now. Lira nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Yes, it's like a promise, one we've been entrusted to keep. She glanced at him, her gaze soft but firm. This magic, Borin, it belongs to more than just us. We must share it with our kin, remind them of the bonds we had once. Borin's brow furrowed, but a hint of a smile tugged at his lips. The old tales say dwarves and elves were like fire and water, each powerful in its own way, but rarely mixed. Yet here we are, an elf and a dwarf, standing side by side, carrying the same light. He looked at her with newfound respect. Perhaps this is how it begins again. They pressed onward, the forest shifting around them, guiding their steps as though Elrindor itself recognized their purpose. As they walked, Lira began to see the path ahead, not just as a return home, but as the first steps of a new journey. A journey to restore the unity Eldrion had shown them. As night deepened, they reached the edge of the forest where their paths would part. The boundary between their worlds felt less certain, as though the land itself were loosening the barriers that had once divided their realms. They stood in the starlight, the silence between them no longer heavy with doubt, but alive with the promise of what lay ahead. Borin extended his hand, his rough, calloused palm open in a gesture of trust and respect. Lira grasped it, her slender fingers closing around his. In that moment, she knew that they had forged more than a bond between themselves. They had rekindled an alliance between their peoples, a partnership woven from courage and shared purpose. "Goodbye, Lira," Borin said, his voice steady, but with a warmth that softened its usual gruffness. "May the light of Eldrion guide you." "And you, Borin," Lira replied, her voice bright with hope. "May we meet again, when the stars align and the crystal wings return." They released their hands, each turning toward their own realms, yet feeling as though they were no longer walking separate paths. With every step, they carried Eldrion's gift, a beacon of the ancient wisdom that now thrummed within them, a reminder of what could be, of the unity they would strive to rekindle. As Lira entered the elven woodlands, she noticed the stars shining brighter above, their light seeming to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. And Borin, making his way down the rugged path to his kin's mountain halls, felt the stones underfoot, each one a silent witness to his journey. They both knew that when they spoke of the dragon's flight, their people would listen, and perhaps the old bonds would be born anew. The forest of Elrindor grew still once more, holding their footsteps in memory, preserving their story in its roots and leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a faint shimmer crossed the sky, a trail of stardust, the last remnants of Eldrion's passage, fading into the endless night, yet leaving behind a light that would not dim. And so Lira and Borin returned to their worlds, each carrying the legacy of the crystal-winged dragon, a silent promise that echoed within them, calling them to honor the magic that bound them and to guard the secrets of Eldrion's wings until the next 100 years, when the dragon's light would again grace the forest of Elrindor.